Welcome to My Verses Are Like Dynamite, Curt Bloch's Het Underwater Cabaret in our series Flight or Fight, Stories of Artists Under Repression. I'm Rachel Stern, Executive Director of the Fritz Ascher Society for Persecuted, Ostracized, and Banned Art based in New York. I'm honored to introduce today's esteemed speaker. Aubrey Pomerance has directed the archives of the Jewish Museum Berlin and the GMB branches of the archives of the Leo Baeck Institute, New York, and of the Wiener Holocaust Library since 2001. He was born in Canada in 1959 and studied Jewish studies and East and Southeast European history at the Free University of Berlin. In 1995-96, he became a research assistant at the Institute for Jewish Studies there. From 1996 to 2001, Aubrey Pomerance was a research assistant at the Salomon Ludwig Steinheim Institute for German Jewish History in Duisburg. At the Jewish Museum Berlin, he curated the exhibitions Roman Wisniak's Berlin, Ruth Jacobi Photographs, and Shrines, Papyri, and Winged Goddesses, the archaeologist Otto Rubensohn, and was also one of the curators of the GMB's new core exhibition, which opened in 2020. He publishes on German Jewish commemorative culture, Jewish lives during the Nazi era, Jewish photographers in Berlin, archives, and archival education. Welcome, Aubrey.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And thank you very much for the invitation to speak about Curt Bloch and his unique and remarkable work at Underwater Cabaret. I am one of the curators of the exhibition of the same name that was shown at the Jewish Museum Berlin from February 9th until June 23rd of this year. We actually extended it for 4 weeks, and it was very well received, and it got a lot of national and international press, which we were very thrilled about, both about the exhibition, but also about Curt Bloch as his life and his work. And the fact that after almost 8 decades since Curt Bloch created this remarkable work of creative, artistic, and political resistance while in hiding between August of 1942 and April of 1945, that it has now come to the fore is thanks to Curt Bloch's daughter, Simone Bloch, who has made the collection that her father preserved available for an historian in the Netherlands who wrote a book about Curt Bloch and the Underwater Cabaret that appeared in Dutch in November, to the Jewish Museum Berlin in order for us to do the exhibition and everything accompanying with. And Simone herself, together with Tilo von Debschitz, have created a wonderful, very comprehensive website pertaining to Curt Bloch and the Het Onderwater Cabaret. Today I'm going to speak both about Het Onderwater Cabaret, but also about further writings of Curt Bloch. As many of you, I'm sure, where am I stuck? Rachel, I'm frozen.
1
second. Let's see. I'll start again. I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay, it should work now.
Okay. As I'm sure that all of you read, Curt Bloch created Het Onderwater Cabaret between August of 1943 and April of 1945. In total, he created 95 issues, which were issued once a week. There was also a special edition, which comprised poems from a number of various issues that he put together actually as a gift for helpers in August of 1944. And here we see all 95 issues of Het Onderwater Cabaret that appeared in that time. In total, there are 483 poems, and they are written either in Dutch, probably 60% of the poems, and German, and there's one single one in English, which we will also then have a look at. Curt Bloch was also very prolific. This was not the only thing that he wrote while he was in hiding, and we're going to see a number of his other works. that he penned as well. The Het Onderwater Cabaret was probably inspired by a fascist and anti-Semitic propaganda broadcast on Dutch radio, which was called Zondagmiddag Cabaret, Sunday afternoon cabaret. And it was the brainchild of a Dutch songwriter by the name of Jacques de Tol. And it was actually done in reaction to a broadcast by Vrije Nederland, so Free Netherlands, which was being broadcast from London. And it's 100% certain that Curt Bloch then heard this while in hiding. And I'm sure that he was inspired then to write against this. We know from correspondence that he put together something called the Poems of the Times. And in Het Onderwater Cabaret, he addressed a whole very wide spectrum of issues. He wrote about the course of the war. He wrote about the lies and the crimes of the National Socialists and their collaborators. He wrote about his situation in hiding and the fate of his family. He wrote a lot about the approaching downfall and defeat of the Axis forces and of the fate of the German people. His caustic satire and sardonic wit was used to mock and ridicule all of the major fascist leaders, from Hitler, Goebbels, and Göring to Mussolini and Seyss-Inquart, the Reichskommissar of the Netherlands, alongside of a host of their subordinates and henchmen, while always remaining acutely conscious of the enormity of their atrocities. Curt Bloch was born on November 9th, 1908, in the industrial city of Dortmund. He was the first child of Sigmund and Paula Bloch. Sigmund Bloch had a delicatessen store in the center of Dortmund, but he was also a sculptor. And Curt was the first of three children. His sisters Erna was born in 1912 and Helena born then in 1923. After completing gymnasium in Dortmund, Curt then went to university and studied law, and he studied in Bonn, in Berlin, in Freiburg, and in Regensburg, and received then his doctorate from the University of Regensburg in 1931. He received his inaugural dissertation, and thereafter then he started articling as a lawyer at the municipal courts, and he was clerking. He was working as a clerk in a small town called Lunen in Cologne, but most of the time then in Dortmund. And in 1933, when the National Socialists came to power, one of the first laws that the National Socialists passed was a law which was called the reinstitution of the civil service, which was a euphemism for basically expelling Jews from the civil service, which meant that it affected teachers and doctors and musicians and lawyers, of course. So Curt Bloch did not have a future as a lawyer in Germany in any manner, but as a very leftist thinking and active socialist, Curt Bloch was also then personally endangered. And in an autobiographical work, he talks about a murder plan against him. And he fled then at the end of April of 1933 to the Netherlands, first to Amsterdam, did many menial jobs. He wrote also that he also wrote for a German language exile newspaper that we have not been able to identify up until now. And in 1935, then he received a job at a company selling Persian carpets in Den Haag, in The Hague. And he was there for 5 years. As I'm sure everybody is aware, in May of 1940, the Germans invaded the neutral Netherlands, and 5 days later completely occupied and conquered the small Western European country. Before that, Curt's mother, Paula, and his sister, Helena, had also then emigrated, fled to the Netherlands in the spring of 1939. Curt's father had passed away in 1934, and his mother, Paula, continued the shop in Dortmund, and the shop and the family was subjected to anti-Semitic smears and a forced sale of the business. And Paula and Helena then joined Curt, first in The Hague, and then in the fall of 1940, the Germans forbid non-Dutch Jews to live in towns and cities along the coast. And Curt, together with his mother and younger sister, then moved to the eastern town of Enschede, which is very, very close to the German border. where there was also a branch of the Paris company, where then Curt was able to continue working until the fall of 1941. In 1941, this is his Personenbeweis, his identity card. As you can see, it's marked with the infamous J, identifying the holder as being a Jew. And in May of 1942, Jews in the Netherlands were also subjected to wearing the yellow star. The previous picture shows Curt with his mother and sister in front of the house in the street where they lived in Enschede. Curt then also was working as an advisor for the Jewish advisory, the Jodse Raad of Enschede, both consulting with regard to emigration as an advisor, but also with regard to legal matters pertaining to the Jodse Raad, which was the new name for the Jewish community in Enschede. And on the 5th of August, you can see, I believe it's the 5th of August, he was issued a document which said that he was working for the Raad, which was intended to help him avoid being deported. The mass deportations of Jews from the Netherlands began in July of 1942. And nonetheless, then just 3 weeks later, Curt went underground, as did his mother and sister. Curt went underground in Enschede and was taken in by a couple by the name of Mennekens, who lived in a family home in a residential area of Enschede. Curt's mother and sister Helena found refuge first in the city of Apeldoorn and later then in Leiden. In the fall of 1942, Curt enabled two friends of his who he had met after coming to Enschede to also find refuge with Albertus and Leda Menneken. Here on the left, Bruno Löwenberg, who had then also come to Holland in 1933 from the German city of Aachen, and the younger Carola Wolf, who had actually been in England and was visiting her parents in Enschede. Her parents had fled to Enschede in July of 1939. And while she was visiting, the Second World War broke out, and the family decided that Carola would stay with them. Bruno and Carola were a couple when they came to the Mennekens, and it created a rather challenging situation for during the time that Carola was together with Bruno and Curt at the Mennekens. Curt fell in love with her. Perhaps he certainly had a crush on her before. The three of them knew each other before in Enschede, as I said. And here we have a photograph which was donated to the museum by Carola Wolf's son, Robert Saunders. And we see Bruno on the left and Carola on the right. Then beside her is Curt. And beside Curt is his younger sister, Helena. So we think that this is a photograph that was probably taken in the summer of 1941. Curt began to write at the very latest in the spring of 1943. And in the papers which survived, there are some fragments. Here's a list of poems, none of which appeared in Het Onderwater Cabaret. And we also have a poem which is entitled Schaulied, which is a shelter song dated on the 11th of the 11th of July, 1943. And just to give you a flavor of this early poem, all of Curt's writings, apart from the correspondence, are written in rhymed verse, which makes it very challenging to do a presentation in English. So all of the poems that I'm going to be reciting and quoting today are not in rhymed verse, so they're in prose verse, but I still think that they'll give you a flavor for his writing. So in this early poem called Shelter Song, he writes, and I'm not quoting the whole thing, "It is a time of dread, it is a time of suffering. Will ever heal the suffering that one did to them? They sit and they wait for freedom and for justice and ask in their minds, will soon this plea be settled? It is a time of wounds. It is a time of tears still filled with hope. One must always admonish them, have peace and patience. One day they will leave their cell and walk freely on squares and streets. I would like to be among them." The term Het Onderwater Cabaret appears first in the middle of August 1943. Carola Wolf had left the Menneken house in May of the same year, in 1943, the three friends who were in the house, they got notice that Curt Bloch's mother and sister had been apprehended in Leiden, together with Bruno Löwenberg's father and his older sister, but they did not know of their fate. And at that point, then Carola Wolf left the Mennikens' house. And in August, Curt started to send her writings and also then letters. And here he sent her a cabaret that was done for her 20th birthday on August 14th of 1943. It was a writing which had many postcards of artworks. You can see the list of the names of the artists that he included here. And we see it says Het Onderwater Cabaret, and that it was done on the 14th of August. And the very next day, he also then created a little magazine called Secret Service, which he also called a special edition of the Underwater Cabaret instead of a long letter. Now, Bloch then chose the term Underwater Cabaret because the Dutch word for to go into hiding is undertauchen, to dive under, very similar in German, untertauchen. And then you have the Untertaucher, der Undertaucher. So somebody who then went underwater. And it was only a week later that the actual first issue of Het Onderwater Cabaret appeared on the 22nd of August, 1943. And as you can see here, each issue of Underwater Cabaret is adorned with an illustration on the cover. And with the exception of the first two issues, all of the covers have an illustration which then pertains to one singular poem in the respective issue. And each volume then also has a table of contents, and you can see it here. And the first 3 to 4 months of the existence of Het Onderwater Cabaret, the overwhelming majority of the poems were written in Dutch. There is exceptions, of course, and in the second volume, which appeared then on the 20th birthday of Curt's sister Helena, he devoted 4 of the poems in this volume to his sister. And one of them is, to be sure, one of the most moving of all of the poems that Curt Bloch then penned. It was called Ein Gruß, greeting. Wherever you are lingering, I'd like to greet you, sister dear, and share in all your suffering, just be there sitting at your side. Your life has been so cruel and grim, they robbed you of your youthful cheer. I wanted all the best for you. What came instead came not from me. Oh, how you've always understood, you've always offered me support, and now you're in some distant land, with me, your brother, left behind. Stand firm against the cruelties so sinister that menace you. Stay healthy and stay safe and sound, despite the hatred, lies, and scorn. And when the war is gone at last, then off I'll go in search of you. Within my mind, I grasp your hands and bid you quietly farewell. I long to speak to you so much, my thoughts go flying straight your way. And deep inside my chest, I feel my breaking heart, it pains me so. Curt Bloch did not know when he penned these very emotional lines that his sister and mother had been murdered in Sobibor in May of 1943 after being deported from Westerbork, from the transit camp in the northern part of the Netherlands on May 18th of 1943. In the first volumes of Het Onderwater Cabaret, Curt Bloch is writing a lot about current events. He's writing a lot about the situation in Italy, the Allied invasion, the disposing of Mussolini for a brief period of time. But he's also writing a lot about Dutch collaborators. And this is a title cover from November 20th of 1943. And it's a very, very, very vivid image of somebody hanging from a tree. And the poem is called Bungeldag, Dangle Day. And some of the verses read as follows: we will, after the war ends, catch all the fascists, and then lightly and freely hang them from the trees. The day of dangling, we will call that day. They dangle, and we are delighted. Why should we hide it? The day of justice, the day of punishment, the day of our dreams, the traitors dangle from the trees of the forest. Everyone displays a joyful smile. Everyone is content. Instead of axe day, we call it dangle day. The bloodbath is avoided by hanging rather than by axing. So much is spoken of the day of the axe, the day of strict punishment on which traitors, the crowd servants, are punished without mercy, and impatiently one awaits the day when these heroes are made to pay their heavy debt and the evil be retaliated. In the pages of Het Onderwater Cabaret, Curt Bloch also devoted then poems to some of the victims of the Dutch fascists who had been apprehended and murdered as well. In this same volume, Bungeldag, from 20th November of 1943, there is a German poem which is entitled Weg der Wahrheit, Ways to the Truth. And this poem unmasks the lies of Joseph Goebbels, propaganda minister of the Nazi regime in Berlin. And a portion of the poem reads as follows. My dear German audience, you want to know the truth. You realize that Mr. Goebbels is keeping you stupid. You are being deceived by him. You realize how you are being deceived, and you are deceived by the leadership. The truth is distorted, twisted, and that's how it gets into the papers. What the newspaper writes today is a web of deceit. One hopes and wishes and thinks, so the mood remains. The mood remains in limbo. And if he writes black, read it as white. And if he writes sweet, read bitter. And if he writes cold, then it's hot. Instead of courage, read trembling. And instead of good, read bad. Strengths mean weaknesses. And if Mr. Goebbels writes about law, it means crime. When he writes about a final victory, read it as defeat. And when he writes that Hitler remains, then Hitler's days are numbered. And if he writes straight, read crooked. If he writes crooked, read straight. Yes, just turn his writing around. He writes benefit, read shame, recognizes in him the lying drip, finally comes to clarity. Turn Dr. Goebbels on his head, and then you'll find the truth. And so the undertaking of Het Onderwater Cabaret is an undertaking which is really writing about disinformation. And Rachel and I, before we began, were speaking just how relevant Curt Bloch's work is for the present day, a world which is swamped by disinformation on a level that I don't think we've ever seen before. And this is exactly what Curt Bloch was also then writing against. Now, the Underwater Cabaret itself was something that Curt thematized in a number of issues. And the issue from December 18th, 1943, and this is a cover that we used as the key visual for the exhibition of the Jewish Museum, was a Dutch poem with the eponymous title. And the first few verses are very illuminating with regard to what the Underwater Cabaret is and what its scope and limitations are. I quote, "Carefully one keeps it hidden. One does not wish it to be found. For when it's found, believe me, friend, one would truly be in trouble. All that is said in here, indeed, does not amuse the noble Germans. The OVC firmly speaks its mind each and every time, is free from suppression and control, unrestricted by authority. Sys Inquart has no power here. NSB dogs have no business here. Is independent and free and open its heart to all. Colored it is in shades of freedom. Indeed, it seems to favor red. Is a messenger of a new era, which it impatiently awaits, yet the readership for which it acts is quite small and limited. But as one knows, these are not the times for big publicity. Nonetheless, its readers, up until now, are happy with the OVC." And he goes on then to write, "So naturally one may desire its termination to be quick. Willingly and full of joy then dies the Underwater Cabaret." And that's an expression of Bloch's hope that they will be liberated sooner rather than later. And he made it clear in a number of poems, because as I mentioned at the beginning, Het Onderwater Cabaret spans almost 20 months. And he was very much hoping to put Het Onderwater Cabaret to bed, because that would have then gone hand in hand with his liberation. Now, it's very interesting that he writes about the limited readership. So the question has often been arised, who was his audience? Now, he was definitely sharing his poems that he penned for Het Onderwater Cabaret with the couple that he was then staying with. And it was a house where he and Bruno Löwenberg, they basically slept in the attic, but they were able then to move around the house during the day when it was safe. And they also met with helpers and friends of each other, but also of the Mennekens. So there was a whole group of people who were aiding not only Curt Bloch and Bruno Löwenberg, but no small number of Jews who had gone into hiding both in Enschede and in the Netherlands in general. And in Enschede, and indeed in the province of Overijssel, the majority of those who went into hiding were helped by a group that was formed by the Enschede pastor Leendert Overdown. Leendert Overdown had begun to help Jews following a roundup of 105 Jews in September of 1941, which was the result of telephone cables being cut, and those 105 Jews from towns in Enschede and surrounding towns were all deported to Mauthausen, and within 3 months, all of them had been murdered there. And a number of individuals who had escaped being arrested turned to the pastor, and he took in 3 Jewish citizens of Enschede into his own home. And together with his sister, a resistance group then began to be formed, of which there were many, many helpers. And thanks to the efforts of Leendert Overdown and his resistance group, upwards of 1,000 Jews were saved in the province of Overijssel. He was recognized later as a righteous amongst the nations. And a book that was written about him has just been translated into German and has appeared. And the editor of it is a gentleman by the name of Herbert Schwarz, who also then survived in Enschede in hiding together with his father. His mother and sister survived in another house, thanks to the efforts of Leendert Overdown. And for Mr. Schwarz, it was very, very important to also have this book published in German. And I had the great privilege of doing a public conversation with Herbert Schwarz in April here at the Jewish Museum Berlin, which was very well received. Beginning in December, the very end of December of 1943, Curt Bloch began to paste then newspaper clippings and also photographs that he found in newspapers into the pages of Het Onderwater Cabaret. And these newspaper clippings really became the inspiration for the great majority of poems that he then wrote. And often he's writing against the propaganda that he's reading. This obviously means that Curt Bloch had access to definitely the daily paper that appeared in Enschede, Venture Nieuwsblad, and but also a host of others. He also had, there were materials there which were much older newspapers and magazines, which we'll see in a moment. And in a letter to Carola Wolf, he also then noted that he really felt that Het Onderwater Cabaret had really improved through the use of such clippings and images. And he said, you know, why didn't he do it much further? He did it at the end of 1943 for the next 16 months. This was a method that he did. And in the volume of January 29th, 1944, there's also a number of newspaper clippings. And one is a report which actually stems from October of 1943, which tells of 4 individuals who had worked at a welfare office in Berlin, and they were prosecuted and sentenced to death and executed for spreading one singular poem, which was critical of the National Socialist regime. Curt Bloch called this poem Ein Ziel, and it is from this poem that the title of our exhibition and of my presentation today stems. So I'm going to just quote a number of verses from it. As I say, 4 people that were then sentenced to death by the Volksgericht. And Curt Bloch writes, 4 lives for just a single poem. I asked myself with wonder, what would happen to me? I have nearly 400. And all rather explosive and very anti-fascist. Yes, if something went wrong for me, then I'd be pessimistic. My verses are like dynamite, like nitroglycerin. They break the Furs building's granite, satirical, mocking, cynical. And your minds must be free from those delusional ideas that Hitler, Göring, Goebbels lay so in your heads. So my poetry has a purpose, to purge the minds and to drain Goebbels' propaganda filth from them. Mr. Goebbels has now for years poisoned your thinking. Now, thank heavens, you're getting your brains aired out. With my poetry, I want to wash your heads properly. You believe so much stupid stuff. It will surprise you. My poetry works in your brain like a great cleansing. No, really, heaven and earth, there's nothing to laugh about. It's a mental enema that will purge you so that you'll correct many a mistake thereafter. I wish you and wish the world that out of a herd of sheep, the German people, however hard it may be, become a nation of human beings. Alongside Het Onderwater Cabaret, for a period of 7 months, Curt Bloch also penned the periodical which he had entitled Secret Service, the first number of which we previously saw. And just like Het Onderwater Cabaret, the Secret Service was also embellished by covers which were made up of photo collages and photo montages. Many of the covers also then devoted to a single poem in the Secret Service. The Secret Service, however, had a readership of 1. And that readership was Carola Wolf. Curt Bloch sent Secret Service to her, together, by the way, with almost every issue of the Underwater Cabaret, in sealed letters. And he maintained a very extensive correspondence with Carola Wolf from August 1943 up until April of 1945. And Carola Wolf then preserved all of the letters that he had written to her, along with also all of the Secret Service. She obviously gave the issues of the Het Onderwater Cabaret back to Curt because they survived in his possession, while all of the Secret Service volumes survived in her possession, with the exception of one which somehow got lost along the way. And as we were working on the exhibition, the relationship between Curt Bloch and Carola Wolf and Bruno Löwenberg came to our attention. And I was able to contact the descendants of both Bruno Löwenberg and Carola Wolf, who then also entrusted materials to us. And this was an absolutely wonderful addition for the exhibition, and also for Curt Bloch's testimony, because the Secret Service there are a very small number of poems which are political in nature, but most of the poems are humorous love poems that Bloch then wrote for Carola Wolf. And he wanted to basically win her over. She was very enamored by these, but it was a very difficult relationship. It was a love per distance, as Curt Bloch then described it. And he only continued to write the Secret Service until Carola Wolf then said to him that she no longer wanted to receive it. And that was in March of 1944. And nonetheless, the relationship then remained. He continued to write her long, long letters that were taken by messengers to her. You can see, you saw the sealed letter. So they maintained their correspondence. Unfortunately, Curt Bloch did not keep the letters that he had received from Carola Wolf, but the correspondence that he sent to Carola is really a barometer, really, of his feelings almost on a day-to-day basis. It's an incredibly important source. that I haven't completely read through, but it was tremendously beneficial to provide really priceless information about the time that he was in hiding. And just to give you just a small feeling for the verses of the Secret Service, which also are very broad in nature, I will read from one that was penned also then in February of 1944, called Escape from the Present. We hardly see each other now, most recently 3 weeks ago. In my imagination, though, I'm with you every walking hour. We talk about my latest poem, we talk about the daily news, and then I do not feel the chains that weigh us down so heavily. The horrors of the present day can be escaped in brilliant ways, and in my mind, I still can draw you close, beloved, one to me. And we both hope the day will come that out of letters, life will grow. A splendid new reality, a gift that someday soon we'll share. Curt's hopes were unfortunately not realized, but a little bit more about that briefly. Now, alongside the Secret Service, which he kept also secret from both the Dominicans who had hid him and Bruno and Carola for a while, but he also kept it away from Bruno, who had been Carola's boyfriend when they entered the Dominican house. But alongside those publications, Curt also penned a number of other writings, and a very fascinating one is called Het Boek van Piet en Koba, the Book of Piet and Koba, written by Cornelis Bredenbeck. That was Curt Bloch's pseudonym, which he used for all of his further writings, and it is also a name that appears 3 times in Het Onderwater Cabaret. And this is really, this work here comprised of 12 adventures of 2 adolescents who resisted the German occupiers in the Netherlands. And Bloch was very, very proud of these adventures. And very interestedly, in the very, very first issue of Het Onderwater Cabaret, you see that on the right, he was actually then advertising for the Book of Piet and Koba. And he said that after the war, this would be the book about youth in occupied Netherlands. And in the correspondence to Carola, he had written that he very much hoped that after the war was over, he would have it illustrated and published. So this is a work that was completed almost at exactly the same time that Het Onderwater Cabaret began to appear. A couple of other very actually comprehensive writings of his, one on the left called Dortmunder Bierzeitung, was an autobiographical work which was based on Curt Bloch's life in the city of his birth in Dortmund. And he writes a lot about his fellow pupils at the gymnasium and teachers and what became of them and what their political leanings were. And it had a subtitle, which was An Anti-Fascist and Anti-Bourgeois Reader for a New Germany. And a lot of very important biographical information comes from the book. And on the right, we have a book which is titled Irrfahrt durch den Weltenraum, Odyssey Through Space. And Bloch called it his great political comedy. And it tells of the cosmic wanderings of the ghosts of Hitler and Mussolini, who we can see on the cover, in their search for a final resting place. And it's actually kind of a continuation of a poem called Astronomical Possibilities that Bloch then wrote, and which appeared in one of the early issues of Het Onderwater Cabaret, where Hitler's looking through a telescope, looking to the planets to see if there might be a planet where he can then find refuge, because aware that he would have to flee in order not to stand responsible for the atrocities that he committed. In this volume, both Hitler and Mussolini are no longer alive, but their ghosts are seeking then refuge. Bloch also penned an awful lot of cabarets and poems that were written for special occasions for friends, helpers. And this, for example, it's called Het Zolder Cabaret, the Attic Cabaret, and it was written for Albertus Menneken on the occasion of his birthday in October of 1943. And it's also very humorous because in the description for Albertus, Bloch imagined that he would become famous after the war, and he suggests in the work that Albertus then hangs a plaque on his house and then gives tours. And in the poem, it says, during the war, Curt Bloch was hidden in this house in good times and bad. And it was here that he wrote the Underwater Cabaret. The house is available for viewings daily from 9 to 12:30. And it's very interesting because in this short work, Bloch actually describes the interior of the house and where he's actually sitting and where he's writing and where he's eating. So highly interesting. And for Bruno Löwenberg, whose underground name was Jopi, Curt Bloch then also wrote a cabaret, which he presented him also on the occasion of his birthday in 1944. And he writes that he did not have any worthy presents for Bruno. So he gives him 2 tickets, and one is for a deluxe edition of Het Onderwater Cabaret, which would appear then after the war, and another one for the theater premiere of Odyssey Through Space. So you can really see Bloch's humor here as well. In June of 1944, this is a cover of the issue from June the 3rd of 1944, and it's one of the very few covers that actually show the victims of the Nazi oppression and persecution. This is actually a photo that was taken in the first days of the war of Polish civilians being marched off by a Wehrmacht soldat, and it's I think probably one of the strongest portrayals of Nazi crimes in all of Het Onderwater Cabaret. More people die each passing day, more blood is spilled relentlessly from heroes who defy your will, who still resist you and your rage. You never let the terror fade. Oh no, you keep it strong alive, and you defame the German name. By now, the world sees Germany as evil's land, the headquarters of cruelty and tyranny. The world has seen your German ways, and what you've seen, they shan't forget. You've tortured and you've fired your guns. You've wounded, maimed, and massacred. The world is gushing with red blood because of figments of your mind. When people fight for liberty, they're hunted down like criminals. Until you end their misery, your rifles have the final say. They speak in the new German tongue, the cant of Nazi tyranny. And yet revenge won't pass you by. No, somehow it will reach you too. As though alive, the blood-stained earth will speak to you, vile murderers. For freedom fighters you may kill, but liberty shall never die. Bloch followed very, very carefully the course of the war. Obviously, D-Day was something which made him very, very hopeful that liberation would be coming very quickly. He also wrote 2 poems about the unsuccessful assassination attempt on Hitler's life on the 20th of July, 1944. And here again, something which is also very humorous. He pasted a portrait that he found in a newspaper of Hitler into the issue, accompanied by a newspaper clipping, which talks of the explosion, the attempt on Hitler's life. And Bloch lamented in the poem on the right-hand side that Hitler was only slightly wounded in the assassination attempt. And he, in a letter to Carola Wolf, he asked himself, he created this illustration, he asked himself how he should then refer to this technique. And he was wondering if he should call it a photoplastic, or if you should call it a leucoplastic. And that's a play on words. Leucoplast is a brand name, which is basically the German Band-Aid. So it's actually only something that German readers will really then get. And he writes in the poem, "The Führer is only slightly wounded. I find that to be sad. I would love to see Hitler, this dog, explode into pieces. I cherish, I think, not alone such hateful wishes. Almost everyone has the same wish, the wish of all people. Should it happen again, one may aim better. Your wish and my wish are certain that the attack will succeed." I'm going to skip over this poem just because I'm looking at the clock here and see that it's getting on 7 p.m. here, so 1 p.m. in North America on the East Coast. Bloch continues, of course, to follow very directly what was going on. The liberation of Maastricht on September 14th, 1944, filled him with a great deal of hope that he too would soon be liberated. Nobody could imagine that it would then actually be 7 months until liberation came to Enschede, to Overijssel, and then a month later to the entire Netherlands. And he, in this poem, the Nooit Promiscuous, he laments the fact, and it ends with a verse, like Prometheus, whom the gods chained to rocks, then left alone. Here I sit and curse and rage, weary with each passing day. Interestingly, Bloch then, in July of 1944, made a significant change to the covers of Het Onderwater Cabaret. Up until then, he had always written the title in full, Het Onderwater Cabaret. But in July of 1944, he started to use an abbreviation, Het OVC. And this enabled him then to use typography in a really fascinating and creative way on the rest of the covers, which actually make up more than half the entire number of the OVCs. And here I just wanted to give you an impression of how he's doing that, which is really quite fascinating. I also wanted to refer to these absolutely fantastic, creative, imaginative covers that he's using. And we undertook quite a deal of research to find out what his sources were. And when we received the correspondence from Robert Saunders, Curt Bloch, in his correspondence with Carola Wolf, revealed himself what some of his sources were. And here we have 3 titles, and he refers to all of them here in this one letter. With regard to the, and I quote, with regard to the photomontage of Nazi Seemannslattein, that's the cover that you can see on the left, there must be said that the body of the captain is from a sketch of Leon Blum. Leon Blum was the Prime Minister of France in the 1930s. I hope that you will like it. It was a parody of the making of The Bounty in Het Leven. Het Leven was an illustrated magazine that appeared in the Netherlands for 2.5 decades, and was a very important source for Curt Bloch for his covers. Leon Blum has much to suffer from me. First, I'm giving him the head of Franklin D. Roosevelt. That's the cover in the middle. So actually the body on which that head has been mounted was actually the body of Leon Blum in a caricature that was done by Leendert Jordan. And that it's on the body of his great, and now he's put the head of his great antagonist Hitler on Leon Blum's body. I hope he won't take these repeated circumcisions too hard. I myself find the montage quite successful because if you look closely, you don't even notice that the head is mounted. And all I have to tell you about the Sailor's Rose montage, because I'm spilling photo montage secrets. So we're now referring to the Secret Service issue, where you can see that Curt Bloch mounted his own photograph on the cover. And he writes, it is not that of a mariner, but of a Dutch singer peasant from the illustrated magazine Panorama. The cap is of a real English mariner from the illustrated magazine Vi, and the background is from a colored reproduction, also from Panorama. The whole head is mine, although my own head is much more beautiful than this famous photograph. In the research that we did, we were certainly helped by the fact that a great majority of Dutch newspapers have been digitized and are available online. And here, it's really interesting that the different types of sources that Bloch used. Here he's used an illustration from an advertisement for sorry, I missed the English word is escaping me, deodorant. And this little ad there, you can see in the upper right, it says here that thousands of people have body odor, although they don't know it themselves. So he cut this stuff off, and you can see that the figure that's on the stage, he then mounted the head of Hitler, which he found in a cartoon in the same issue, onto it, so that of course, the impression that one is giving is that the audience is shocked by the presence of Hitler on the stage. Here we have the use of images also from the illustrated Vi in two different, it's two illustrations from the same page, but Bloch used them in two different issues of Het Onderwater Cabaret that were months apart. Here, an image from Panorama on the right below of an actor who played Bismarck in a film, and then a drawing of Hitler from a serial novel this is all pre-war. And then here, for example, an illustration that was taken from a magazine, which was basically a radio program announcing the radio broadcasts. In November of 1944, Curt Bloch left the house of the Mennekens. It had been a very tense time for him, especially his relationship with Aleida Menneken, the wife of Albertus, and he was able to find refuge in the town of Borne, which is just 20 kilometers north of Enschede. And he was taken in by a family of 5, the family Hulshoff. And we see Johanna Hulshoff with her 3 children here on the left. And all 3 of these objects were entrusted to the museum by Lida Schrattenkerk, who is the girl on the right-hand side, next to her mother, who's the remaining, the sole survivor of the family. And Curt Bloch, while he was then staying with the Hulshoff family, he also wrote a poem, a modern Helden epic that he wrote for Johanna Hulshoff, which was in admiration of her then driving with a tandem bicycle across the landscape to bring then foodstuffs to needy relatives of hers in a part of miles and miles away from the home, a risky undertaking, which he really thought was very heroic, which it was. And then very, very shortly before liberation, he made this Easter. He wrote an Easter poem with an illustration for the 3 Hulshoff children. And while he was staying with them, he had read to them also the book of Piet and Koba. And the children were so enthralled by the writings that Curt Bloch then in Borne, he was with the Hulshoff family for 3 weeks, but he found refuge with another family there. And he then wrote 3 following adventures in January, February, March of 1945 that also are preserved in his estate. Curt Bloch was then liberated on the 3rd of April, 1945 in Borne, and he titled the final issue of Het Onderwater Cabaret, the Bovenwater Finale. So the above water, the over water final of Het Onderwater Cabaret. And it's very interesting that here, the one single poem that was written in English to the Allied forces, he illustrated with an image which certainly then evokes the impression that it is people who are being liberated that are celebrating and thanking their liberators. The interesting thing is that Curt Bloch then took this image from an issue of an underground newspaper. There were many, many underground newspapers that were published in the Netherlands called Ons Volk. We the people, we the people. And this is the only source of Curt Bloch's illustrations that he actually kept and that was retained and to be found among his papers. And you can see here that he cut the image out, and from the caption from the newspaper in this image, and here also from Delphi Kranten, an online digitization of this paper, we see the image that he used in the paper. And it was actually a picture of General Montgomery, who was being greeted by workers in a munitions factory in England, and it stems from June of 1944, but Bloch then used it as a symbol of liberation. After he was liberated, he set about trying to find out the fate of his mother and his sisters, and then received the terrible then final information that they had been deported to Auschwitz and murdered there. And he then also found out that his older sister, Erna, had been deported in 1941 from Düsseldorf to Riga. And then from Riga, she was then transported to the concentration camp of Stutthof, where she was murdered in the fall of 1944. Curt Bloch had already expressed the wish that after the war that his writings would be used for re-educating the German population. And that was something that also didn't come about. He wrote in another letter that is among his papers to friends, written in 1946, that he didn't have the right connections for that to be done. And it was a very difficult time for him as a survivor, but also as a stateless individual from Germany. Those survivors did not have an easy time in the Netherlands. In the spring of 1946, Curt then met his future wife, Ruth Kahn, who herself was born in Dortmund, who had actually known then Ruth's younger sister, Helena. And Ruth was also the sole survivor of her family. She had been forced to do forced labor for the Philips Company in the concentration camp of Vught in the Netherlands, and was then deported from there to Auschwitz. From Auschwitz, after about a week to 10 days, she was then taken to another camp called Reichenberg, and then survived various further labor camps, but also death marches, and she was liberated in Denmark at the beginning of May. And here we see photographs that were taken of their wedding in the synagogue in Leekstraat in Amsterdam in July of 1946. A son was born in 1947, and Curt and Ruth Bloch then emigrated to the United States in 1948. Curt did a number of jobs before he then established his own business, an antique shop called Continental Antiques. But what did Curt Bloch take with him to the United States? He took Het Onderwater Cabaret, which he had bound before leaving. And it was this form that it then came to the museum, and we then took it apart in order to display all 95 issues of Het Onderwater Cabaret. And this is a photograph of Curt Bloch taken probably in the late 60s or early 70s. Curt Bloch passed away in February of 1975 at the age of 66. And it would be another 5 decades before his incredible work then came into the public domain. These are some images of the exhibition that was opened in February here at the museum. Just go through them here. So we presented all of the issues of Het Onderwater Cabaret, a selection of the issues from Secret Service and other writings. We also then had a room which was called a view into the workshop, which also described his use and the sources of the images that he used for the covers. Here we see the showcase devoted to Secret Service. And we also then created an accompanying website. I invite you also to visit the website. And something really very special, which we produced for the exhibition itself, was a stage production where 7 of Curt's poems were then brought to the stage by the actors and musicians Marina Frank and Richard Gonlach, and also interpreted by the deaf interpreter Matthias Schäfer. And this is a 22-minute program which was shown here in the exhibition. You can see it at the back of the space there. And it's now also online with subtitles, so all of the presentations are in the original. And it's really wonderfully done. And I think it's also been inspiring because more and more people also want to do something with Curt Bloch's work. And it's completely, this is the journal, this is the accompanying publication of our exhibition. And this is also available in digital form online. And Simone Bloch, together with Thilo von Depschitz, created as I said at the beginning, a very, very comprehensive website, which has information about Curt Bloch and his life. But most significantly, it has the digitized version of all of the issues of Het Onderwater Cabaret, accompanied by complete transcriptions and complete translations of all of the works in 3 languages. So all of the poems appear on their website in German, in Dutch, and in English. So that would be then accessible to a very wide audience. We all feel that this is just the beginning of the recognition that Curt Bloch so thoroughly deserves, and we're all very curious and very much looking forward to see what is going to be done with his work. It will definitely be used, is already being used in pedagogical workshops. It is being brought to the stage, and so we really are very, very excited to see what the months and years ahead then will bring about. And I very much am grateful for the opportunity to give you a brief insight into the work today. And thank you very much for your attention. And I hope there might be still a tiny bit of time for a couple of questions. Rachel, I hope I didn't overextend too long.
No, this was absolutely fascinating. And I'm I don't think I'm the only one who could just keep listening to you. Thank you so much. So thank you for giving us a little bit time for questions. So please, everyone, put them either in the chat or the Q&A function. I actually have a question about Curt Bloch's creativity. Was there any indication before he went into hiding, while he was training as a lawyer, that he was especially interested in the arts and in writing, or did that part of him come out once he was in hiding?
Yeah, Curt Bloch had also then written for a center-leftist newspaper called the Generalanzeiger in Dortmund. I haven't been able to find any. It's been digitized, and I'm not aware of any articles that actually have his name on them. So he was definitely already writing. He was definitely a polyglot, so he knew a lot of languages. The correspondence with Carola Wolf is written in 4 languages. It's written in English, in German, in Dutch, and in French, which is really fascinating. Carola had spent a lot of time in England, so she was obviously fluent in English. And Curt Bloch also then wrote, we know this from the correspondence, that he also wrote for this German language exile newspaper. Now, as somebody who was very political, he was certainly aware of the political publications of the time in Germany. And a lot of people who look at the covers automatically think about John Heartfield. And there is certainly a lot to be said about that. And one of the contributions in the journal was written by my co-curator, Ulrike Kuschel, where she examines also the sources that Bloch used and the closeness to the work of John Heartfield and others. So there's no question about it that Curt Bloch was definitely reading the Arbeiter Illustrierte Zeitung. But there were also then similar socialist publications which also used photo montages in the Netherlands, which I'm sure he was also very, very, very aware of. It's very interesting because in the Dortmunder Bildzeitung, Curt Bloch reveals that his first writings in poetry were actually love poems for a girl that he had known while he was still a pupil, and that his older sister had then brought them out and was reading them at the dinner table, which embarrassed Curt greatly. So he actually, it's very interesting because it seems as though his literary career began with love poems. And he also wrote in a letter that he wrote after the war that some people thought his love poems were actually more significant than his political poems. I did see in the chat that somebody wanted also, and I'm sorry I didn't name, I did actually name the author of the book that was written. It's the author is Gerard Groeneveld, and the book was published in Dutch in November of 2023. Curt Bloch, Het Onderwater Cabaret, verzet in satire, so satirical resistance. That's what it's called, so Gerard Groeneveld. And I'm just looking through the chats to see if there are any other questions that...
So someone is asking how many people saw the Underwater Cabinet.
Yeah.
So
it's a very small number. That we know that friends and helpers who visited Curt, he shared it with them. We know a couple of names, but not a lot of names, because also in the correspondence, Curt didn't use, he used a couple of real names. And it was actually thanks to a connection in the Netherlands that we were able to determine who 2 of the friends were, who have passed on, and it didn't have any children, so we weren't able to contact any of the descendants. So it was a very, very small, very small number of people. There have been, it has been written that the material circulated amongst all of the Jews who were in hiding in Enschede. That's definitely not correct. We know that's not the case. First of all, that would have been extremely dangerous. Secondly, it would have been highly unusual then for all of the issues to have actually survived. And there is no issue of Het Onderwater Cabaret is missing. There is something, if I did say that the mother and sister were murdered in Auschwitz, then I definitely misspoke. Paula and Helene Bloch were murdered in Sobibor on March 21st of 1943.
Mm-hmm. Okay, wonderful. So Aubrey, did he continue when he came to the US? Did he continue somehow expressing himself in poems, writings, or in artworks, or was that all taken up by building his existence for his family and himself?
Yeah, you know, I find it also to be a very, very, very tragic story because in the correspondence with Caola Wolf, Curt Bloch is really expressing a lot about his literary ambitions. And it is changing because his mood changes as well. He experiences definitely bouts of depression, as I'm sure everyone did, in hiding. But he definitely, you know, he definitely had plans to do something with his work, and this was all unrealized. Obviously, the work was important to him because it had he bound and he took it and it was on his shelves. But his daughter Simone, I asked her this, of course, as well. And she said, yes, there were some poems that were written for birthdays, but he never pursued it. And of course, these were writings that were all written in German and in Dutch. Mm-hmm. And so the possibility of actually doing something with them in the United States was probably very, very limited. Mm-hmm. And as to the best of my knowledge, he never approached either a German publisher or a Dutch publisher. He never gave, you know, readings of them. I thought that maybe he gave some readings after the end of the war, because amongst the papers, there are a number of poems that have been typed and they're also stapled together. So it kind of looks like he put a program together. There is a letter that he wrote to a cousin of his where he mentions also that the people who heard the poems found them to be very, very, very inspiring. It's unclear whether he's referring to the people he shared them with while in hiding, or whether he may not have also then gave a couple of recitals then after the war in much smaller circles. Mm-hmm. That remains unknown. But no, he basically laid the work to rest and unfortunately didn't pursue any literary ambitions or artistic ambitions. But thankfully, this incredible work has survived.
Yeah, I mean that was the fate of many exiles and immigrants who had to build their new lives in a totally new culture and a new environment, different language. So Karen is asking whether Curt Bloch knew Hebrew or Yiddish. Do you know anything about his relationship with Judaism?
No, you know, I don't. I don't. I mean, I don't think he definitely, you know, wasn't. I mean, Yiddish definitely not. There's no question about that. Hebrew, I believe that he had a bar mitzvah, but so he would have learned some Hebrew. But he didn't go to a Jewish school. He didn't go to a Hebrew school. If he had a bar mitzvah, then he would have learned some Hebrew. But again, I'm not 100% sure about that. And so I really don't know otherwise about his relationship with Judaism as a religion. There are a small number. It's interesting because there's not really that many poems in Het Onderwater Cabaret that refer to Judaism or there are, of course, to the fate of Jews, but that actually have Jews as a topic. There are a number where, and when he's writing about that, then he writes about a haspa, the wandering Jew, and those are some very, very powerful poems. And let me see if I have one. So here's one, and if you'll allow me, Rachel, if we have the time. Yes. I think it might be interesting. I'm not a German native speaker, but maybe it's interesting also for the people who have then tuned in today to hear a poem in the original, because then they hear the rhyme. So this is a poem which is called Abschied, farewell. Von der Erde ausgespien, ungeachtet und verloren, stets verdammt zum Weiterziehen, scheint zum Wandern man geboren. ohne festen Zufluchtsort, stets verjagt und stets vertrieben, einmal hier und einmal dort, und kein Platz ist uns geblieben. Und so muss, a Hassvergleich, wieder man sein Bündel schnüren, und ich frag, wohin wird euch, wohin mich das Schicksal führen? Ist dies Leben, eröffnet man uns eine Tür, willig uns Asyl zu geben, denn wir wollen weiterleben, wenn man auch nicht weiß, wofür. Ist dies Leben wirklich wert? Und solch wunderbare Sache, dass man sich die Mühe mache und sich Sorge uns beschwert? Lasst es laufen, wie es läuft. Lasst nur kommen, was da wolle. Lasst es rollen, wie es rolle. Glücklich jener, der begreift, dass am Ende dieser Zeit, dass am Ende dieser Sorgen einmal taucht ein neuer Morgen, ohne Schmerz und ohne Leid. Bauend auf den guten Stern, lasst uns auseinander gehen, hoffend, dass nicht allzu fern winkt ein frohes Wiedersehen.
Mhm.
I won't read the English translation, but that's one of about 6, 7, 8 poems which basically have the figure of Ahasver as the wandering Jew who does not find sanctity, who through history has been forced to put together his bundle and wander the earth.
Yeah. So what was Curt Bloch able to manage financially with his antique business?
I believe so. As far as I know, yes, but yeah, I don't know the details of the business. But it was a business on the, I think it was on the Lower East Side,
Mm-hmm.
or on the east, maybe not the Lower East Side, maybe the East Side. And yeah, and he had it up until his death, so it seemed to have been. Yeah.
Yeah. Question is whether he published in the Aufbau, right? Because that's a German speaking. No.
Not under his name. Believe me, I and many others, I think that, we've all really tried to find out. That's interesting. There is something I would like to add, that in a letter written in January of 1945 to Carola Wolf, he writes, I am now a published man. And that could only mean that something that he wrote would have been published in one of the underground publications, periodicals, newspapers. And I've searched and searched. Certainly, of course, you're not going to find anything which is actually then adorned by his name. Of course, I've searched with various pseudonyms that I know that he used over the years. The one, of course, was Cornelis Bredenbeck, but in Dortmunder Bildzeitung, he refers to some other pseudonyms that he used actually when he was still a student. I haven't found anything yet, but that is an indication that maybe something was published. So there's definitely still research to be done, and it would be really, really wonderful to find, to be able to ascertain that some of his poems were actually published during the time that he was in hiding.
Yeah, that would be amazing. So Glenn is asking to you to please give the name of the author of the biography again.
Gerard, so in English you would say Gerard Grunefeld. So I learned a bit of Dutch while working on this project. Grunefeld, Groeneveld.
Okay, thank you so much. So you, I'm going to read your translation of something Curt Bloch wrote. Please, at some point in the future, perhaps at some point in the future, the poems in your tongue I composed will be brought to your notice, and if so, to delight, and if so, to delight, will I then be disposed? Sorry. So thank you so much, Aubrey. Glenn is writing, thank you for a truly amazing presentation. I'm just buzzing after this. Truly fascinating and inspiring. Thank you so much, Aubrey, for bringing Curt Bloch and his work to our audience. I hope that much more work will be done now and many interesting projects come out of it. And of course, I hope that it will come to the US, that there will be an exhibition of his work in the US.
I hope so too, Rachel, and also we hope also that the work will be also just that there will be an exhibition in the Netherlands, which makes great. Yes, and I want to thank you once again for the invitation. Thank you very much for the very kind comments in the chat, and thank you all for tuning in today. And yeah, as I said, the journal is available online, the Curt Bloch website. So yeah. I wish you all a great time exploring further Curt Bloch's life and work.
Thank you so much. Take good care, everyone, and all best. Thank you.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.